Are Europe and the US divorcing? Is it au revoir, arrivederci, adios? We're here in the Brussels Signal studio with a senior member of the European Parliament. This is Interference. Welcome back to the studio. We're here with an Italian MEP. His name is Carlo Fidanza. Thank you for coming to the studio, Mr. Fidanza. He is a senior member of the Brothers of Italy, Fratelli d'Italia party, which is the party of Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. And we're here to talk about, well, a possible transatlantic divide. We're here as always with Alex. Say hello, Alex.
Hello.
Okay, first question, down to business. Is this the end, my friend, for the transatlantic relationship? You saw what happened recently in Davos. Lots of people very annoyed, offended even, with what President Trump had to say. Is that the way you see it?
No, I don't think it's time to end these relationships. We have also to make everything possible to keep the two shores of the Atlantic Ocean together, defending the Western civilization and our common values. This is fundamental for in our view. We know that we have external geopolitical actors that are hostile to the Western values, and for this reason, moreover, we have to keep together the two sides of the West. This is fundamental in this moment. Naturally, this has to be made with mutual respect and respecting the value of and the principle of national sovereignty and sovereignty belonging to the people and so on. So I think that we should stand proud as Europe, but on the other hand, stopping these annoying behavior, because many of the circumstances that Trump mentioned in many of his discourse, as narratives, we can say about or against Europe, is something that we, from the conservative point of view, we said for many years without being listened from the Brussels bubble, we can say. So if we want to recover strength in order to be more assertive in the friendly relationship with the US, we need to recover our competitiveness without burdening our enterprises. We have to invest more in defense without giving all this space to the Americans. That naturally, on the contrary, they ask for deciding on our behalf if we don't invest on ourselves. So this is the vision that we have to apply from the conservative and right-wing side of European politics, in my view.
Alex, Carlo mentioned annoying elements to the speech by President Trump last week. I know that some of those annoying elements haven't gone down well in the UK, have they? What's your view?
Well, look, I think I always find it interesting when people are re-horrified about the way that Trump expresses things, his rhetoric and his approach, as if they sort of have a way of forgetting, amnesia, that this is the way that he functions. He made comments about soldiers not being on the front line in Afghanistan. There's been a lot of pushback against that because obviously there were hundreds of soldiers from across Europe who did fight with America. It was one of the only times that Article 5 of NATO has been triggered after the attack on the Twin Towers. And so they were misguided. They were badly judged. They were, I suppose, offensive. But I think that you've got to sort of add the filter of Trump onto that and just think, well, that is the way he is. You're not going to suddenly change his personality. You're not going to give him a full frontal lobotomy or rewire him to suddenly come across as some sort of smooth-edged, slick diplomat, I should say, rather than sick. And so it's interesting that someone like Mark Rutte, the chief of NATO, seems to have the ability to communicate with Donald Trump. But one thing is clear, look, Donald Trump is no fan of the EU. He sees the EU as a vehicle that has caused a lot of the decline in Europe, especially when it comes to things such as a lack of investment in defense, when it comes to open borders, when it comes to the ever increasing amount of control that the EU wishes to have in almost every aspect of the lives of its citizens. It's interesting to point out, actually, today, there's more divergence and sovereignty when it comes to the American states compared to the federal governance of America than there is between the European member states. That is how entrenched Europe has become. And Trump from the beginning has made it very clear he didn't think NATO were investing enough in defense and relying too heavily on America. I think that is fair enough. That there were trade imbalances and that Europe would get itself into a mess and then come to America with the begging bowl. I think that is fair enough. But the way that he expresses himself isn't cuddly and cozy. He says all sorts of mad things. I mean, the thing that I thought was the most astonishing was when he was banging on about not getting the Nobel Peace Prize. But you just have to factor that in. This is the American president. He's going to be the American president for 3 more years. And so Europe's got to learn how to negotiate with him. But the problem is with Europe, and especially European media, is they're so sort of wired up to find him offensive, to regard him as dangerous. Yes, he's powerful. Yes, he takes no prisoners. You know, he will do and say exactly what he wants, but he's on our side. He is our team. We're not dealing with a sort of foreign dictator of a hostile regime. This is actually a man who fundamentally cares a lot for Europe, cares for its legacy and its heritage, and wants to see it progress and get itself in with solid footing in a good position. And he doesn't have much patience with the way that Europe acts. And for instance, when there was a lot of media noise about this idea that America was actually going to go and invade Greenland, and then everyone sort of on social media is throwing in their two-bit and making their statements and trying to have the last word, that really angered Donald Trump, because I didn't see it in the beginning of all of this any indication that he was saying he was going to physically invade Greenland. Then when Europe decided they needed to go put troops in Greenland, which is what Trump wanted, he wanted to see reinforced defense in the Arctic. The media then spun this into an idea that European troops were being stationed there to fight against American troops, which to me I thought was absolutely baffling. It was quite clear what he wanted to do. He saw that Greenland was becoming a liability, that the Greenlanders, by the last poll was 84%, wanted sovereignty and a divorce from Denmark, and that would potentially leave them extremely vulnerable to the predatory mercantilism of China and the encroaching military hostility from Russia. And Trump realized that Greenland is going to be absolutely pivotal over the coming decades. And so he decided he wanted Greenland, he wanted it to be reinforced, he wanted it to be part of his Golden Dome missile defense system, and in true Trumpian fashion said, right, that's what I want, that's what I'm going to get. And, you know, very much strong-armed his way in. And people talk about TACO, you know, this idea that Donald Trump has sort of capitulated once again. No, this is what he always does. He leads with bluster, and in the end, he ends up getting his own way. Now, the Europeans are backtracking and saying, well, he could have always had that stuff. And you think, well, would that have happened without a kick up the backside? Because I think what we saw over Greenland was basically 10 years worth of discussions, hand-wringing, so-called diplomacy, prevarication, a lack of commitment, back chats in the corridors of power. It was accelerated at 32 times pace and basically ended up getting done in a week, because that is how Donald Trump operates. And I think that the more time we spend getting upset about the nature of the way he expresses things, some of the more interesting, let's say, things that he says, that the words he uses, the more we're not actually understanding that, yes, he's Trump. Yes, he's very effective at getting things done. Yes, you've got to push back sometimes, but he is on our side as Europeans.
Now, Carlo, you sit in the European Parliament, and therefore you talk to people from all over Europe. And I ask you this because I know that the reactions towards Trump are different from country to country. For example, you have been talking about people who maybe would like to see division between Europe and the US. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yes, first of all, I want to say that I fully agree with Alex, and I want to mention as well this recent issue of the soldiers, the military in Afghanistan, because this was causing a strong reaction also from the side of our Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni against these wars, because at the same level of the UK, a bit less, fortunately, but also Italy had more than 50 soldiers died in Afghanistan in order to support the military operations with the NATO assets and the US over there. So it's a sort of bloody wound still also for our country. For this reason, we reacted as well against these words, asking for more respect. I think this is the way to be friends, not accepting any kind of things. Then on the other side, we perfectly understand how Trump moves, speaking moreover and overall to his domestic public opinion for domestic reasons, moreover, and then also in order to give signals to NATO and to the allies to do more and more. But yes, okay, it's understandable from his point of view, but this has to be done keeping a respect, mutual respect with his allies. And having said that, naturally we had different kind of reactions. For example, even in our conservative group, but also in the Patriots group, we have members from Denmark, and for sure for them it was outrageous to put into discussion the sovereignty of Denmark on Greenland, and the reaction that they asked us to have as a group was tough. They asked us to defend the Danish sovereignty on Greenland. Naturally, we did it, but also highlighting the elements that Alex mentioned very well about the need to increase the security of the Arctic region and to have NATO as a composition umbrella under whom trying to compose the different interests of Europe and the US in order to improve the security of the region against China and Russian penetration. So this is our point of view, keeping together the national interest of our members, Denmark in this case, with the Western interest and the good relations with the US.
What about the French?
The French, I think they are the main responsible in this moment of this behavior, because and it's not only about Greenland, about the words Macron said, for example, in Davos, speaking about Trump as a bully and so on, but also before in the occasion of the initiatives of the willing coalition about Ukraine,
coalition of the willing,
and other similar occasions. It's something that is a combination, I think, of different elements. First of all, a traditional anti-American narrative in the French politics. Historically, France is more anti-American, briefly said, compared to Italy, for example, or other European Western countries. But on the other side, it's the fruit, it's the outcome of the weakness of Macron in his domestic politics. What we are experiencing right now, that he's a very critical moment for him, lasting for many years, I have to say. Another government made in the parliament without a parliamentary majority, just to postpone the national presidential election and keeping the place in order not to have a right wing win in the next election. So this is the consequence of this kind of behavior, is a weakness of Macron, and he tries to keep all the European Union on board for his own personal and political interests. So this is very clear, and I think that for this reason the reaction from Italy and Germany and a few other governments saying, okay, yes, we have to react, but with a more moderate reaction towards the US are wiser than the Macron behavior, naturally, on the other side, because I think it's not in the European interest right now to widen the distance with the Americans, even if, because, and I want to stop with these words, we have to recover our competitiveness and our strength. And it's not fault of the Americans if we lost it, because we lost it in many cases for our own choices in the recent years, burdening our enterprises with the crazy Green Deal policy and many other bureaucratic fanatics and lunatics decisions. And this is the reasons why we are weak at the negotiation tables. And it's not up to Trump to restore our strength.
It's not his fault, you're saying?
Yeah, it's up to the Europeans.
Okay, nevertheless, some of the Trump comments have gone down badly in other countries and among allies, among people who were happy to see him elected. For example, the Alternative for Germany party, yeah, they've not been happy either with his actions and words, right?
Yeah, I was to say that in my view, there's something to be clarified in the AfD narrative about geopolitical topics and issues, generally speaking, because in many cases we experienced their positions so close to Russian narrative, and so I think that if we want to be coherent on the conservative side, we can invest more on our autonomy. As you know, we speak a lot about strategic autonomy of Europe here and so on. Okay, it's not needed to be pro-America till the very end. You can be more autonomous, we can say, but not making playing the game of our geopolitical competitors. I think this is something to be clarified also on the right-wing side, because, for example, we have many things that we can agree on with AfD, for example, about migration and other identity issues, European future, that's for sure. But on the other side, we are in a geopolitical new shape of the world, and so having clear ideas about who are friends and who are not friends, I think it's quite important in this moment.
Understood. Okay, now let's talk then about your friend and colleague, Giorgia Meloni. I know you two go back a long way. You grew up politically together. In fact, you ran for leader of the youth movement of your party, correct? Yeah. Now, it seems to me that she has been put in a difficult position and that she is having to appease both Ursula von der Leyen and Donald Trump. Can she do it?
She's having good results for the moment. Naturally, it's not so simple because, it's not easy to run after Trump on every single declaration, because he speaks a lot on everything many times per day. So it's quite difficult. But the solution, we can say, is trying to have evidence of the strategy, because what we have to dissolve is the European bubble narrative that Trump is sort of crazy, dangerous guy. It's not crazy. He's not crazy. He has a clear strategy. When he says, for example, that he wants to defend the Western Hemisphere and he wants security for the U.S., starting from Greenland to the last point of South America, he's saying something very clear, and we have to take into account this. It's not a folly. It's a clear strategy that has been stated in many documents from all the conservative think tanks in these 4 years of opposition at the national level, preparing is coming back to the power. So it's not by case. It's something that is strategically decided, and so we have to not to take into account every single word, but to take into account the strategy, the vision of these, and make our accounts with these strategies. So this is the main point, and Giorgia Meloni has focused perfectly these, and naturally she has to manage also the daily life. For example, about Afghanistan, I mentioned not by case, but with the strategic vision, say, okay, we know that he has these goals. Let's see how these goals can be combined with our national, in the Italian case, and European interests. For example, we have common interests in having a major presence, for example, in Africa, that is a continent completely abandoned by Europeans and Western countries in these years, and China penetrated, together with Russia, Turkey, and other geopolitical actors, completely in Africa, where we have critical raw materials, we have migration flows uncontrolled, and so on. So it's so important for us to be there. So Italy is driving this kind of new commitment from Europe, and we feel the support of the US on our back, because it's also their interest to be more involved over there. Maybe not boots on the ground, but having a friendly actor to be there on behalf of the Western world. This is just an example, but we have to work on these common interests, say, okay, if you want to focus on the Indo-Pacific, on the Western hemicycle, and so on, we can do something else for the common good of the Western civilization.
Alex, you're a fan of Giorgia Meloni, are you not?
I am, yeah.
And what do you think to her position in this transatlantic?
Well, it's interesting. she hasn't really come under this sort of gunshots of Donald Trump at all. I think he's rather a fan of hers as well. But it's very difficult. I mean, Nigel Farage has the same. The way things play domestically to your vote base is very different to the way things play out on the world stage. And so there are plenty of people who would have found some of the things that Trump said extremely offensive and insulting. So you have to somehow be able to reach out to them and say, yes, you are correct in feeling that way, while at the same time not upsetting Donald Trump, because he does have a sort of, very unique personality where you get on the wrong side of him and it can all blow up. But he's also very good, I think, at moving on from things as well. But I don't think, if you think that that's it, it's all done, the trouble's over, I'm telling you right now, it isn't, because he's made plain that what he wants to do is see a complete reconfiguration in Europe where he wants the right kind of leaders who stand up for what he sees as Western values and Western interests. And by that, I mean open borders. By that, I mean net zero. He wants to see Europe put an end to those things, but also their international relationships, particularly with China. And what you've got to remember, especially for the United Kingdom, and in looking at the United Kingdom, I'm also thinking about Canada, Australia and New Zealand, because Canada and Australia have started to deepen their ties with China. So Keir Starmer's about to go to China himself. And that in many respects compromises what is called Five Eyes, which is the intelligence sharing body of the big countries in the Anglophone world. And America's beginning to look at Europe and think they're a liability. They didn't do very well when it came to Iran and the nuclear deal, where they essentially trusted Iran not to carry on proliferating uranium and tried to negotiate essentially with a terrorist state. They're still not being particularly strong on Iran now. And looking at the way that they dealt with Russia, and that is before Russia invaded Ukraine. You've got to remember that Europe essentially turned a blind eye when Putin decided to go and invade Crimea and annex it. They just went, well, okay, fine, you can have that, because they all relied upon Russian gas, because they had essentially closed down all of their own fossil fuels. And so Trump is going to carry on being an interventionist. He doesn't want to see leaders such as Macron stay in power. He wants to see a new generation of populist parties across Europe. And he's made plain, actually, he is prepared to do what he can to help that happen. So I'd imagine there's going to be a lot more fluctuations to come, because we've still got a huge caucus of extremely left-wing media who despise Donald Trump. And I think especially in Europe, whereas in the UK, we regard America as very much our cousins. We sort of made them in some respects, and we speak English together. We share the same music and films and television programs. It's not necessarily the same in Europe. I try and think of what it'd be like if America was a Spanish-speaking country, or a German-speaking country, or a French-speaking country. Would we be as comfortable with the might of America, or would we too also look towards Europe as the main power base? I mean, the United Kingdom has always played this bridging role between the continent of Europe and America, and often feels like it's in the middle of a tug of war. But going forward, I think that, the sort of ructions we've seen over Greenland are going to continue. So it'll be interesting to see actually how this plays out with characters from the EU such as Ursula von der Leyen, but also people like Macron, who from his point of view, he is very much for the European project. He sees himself as central to that. He's always had great ambitions to set up another form of a European coalition with him as the leader. So he is not one to sort of stand back and say, well, okay, let America call the shots. But as Carlo was saying, his days are numbered. Let's see what happens in the French presidential elections. I think if we were to see this wave of populism that is hitting Europe actually come to pass, Giorgia Meloni managed to get elected, even though there were so many horrible things said about her, the fear-mongering, suggesting she was a fascist. And she's proven to everybody that she's a capable leader, that she gets on with everybody, that she's not dangerous, that she's actually very effective and has become very respected. But Europe, and especially the EU, has had a tendency, when it's faced with populists who say we don't want open borders, we don't want net zero madness, to do everything they can in their power to try and remove them from the democratic process. We saw that in France. We're seeing that in Germany. We've seen that in many respects in the Netherlands. And America is alive to that. They're aware of that. And quite frankly, it seems to me Donald Trump is not going to stand on the sidelines and observe that continuing to take place.
Now, that's what I wanted to ask you about, Carlo, because unlike some of these quote far-right unquote parties, for example, in France and in Germany, your party has managed to take power in Italy. You know, there is this so-called cordon sanitaire in place, even here in Belgium. How have you managed to do it when other parties of your ilk have not?
I have to say that we have a different political system from many other European countries, because starting from the mid 90s, we had a bipolar political system with a center-right coalition against a center-left coalition, led differently during the years, led by different parties during all these decades. And what we experienced in Italy is that in these last 30 years of this bipolar system, you can say we had a different shift inside the center-right coalition, and the final step was the affirmation of our party, so a right-wing leadership within the center-right coalition. This was our experience. So we were outside the cordon sanitaire already in the mid 90s, after the end of the so-called First Republic, when corruption investigations destroyed, we can say, the old political elite, and another system came up. So this is the specific case of Italy, and it's something different also from the electoral system point of view. For example, if you look at France, for example, or if you look at Germany, where you have a fully proportional system, then after the elections they can decide to put together the socialists and the Christian Democrats against the AfD. And what we are experiencing in France with these presidential system, I hope was that if the two biggest center-right and leftist party, they agree for the Republican front in the second round, they defeat the Rassemblement National candidate. So we have different political system. Our system allowed us to come to the power without any kind of disruption, but just changing the balance within the conservative coalition. So it's quite different from others. But I think it's something that is going to happen also with different political system in the end, because it's the strength of the people will, you can stop it. In the end, for example, if you consider what's happening in Spain, even if they have a fully proportional system, people want to have a coalition between the Popular Party and Vox now is up to 20%, and if they want not to give the power again to the far left of Sanchez and his guys, they have to make an agreement after the elections and stay together and go together to the government. And maybe also with the presidential elections in France, we will see something different from the past, because the barrier has to be destroyed by the vote of the people in the end, and probably is something that is going to happen also in the UK and in many other countries. So I think this is the perspective right now. What we have to work on now is to build a common ground of cooperation on the right wing side, naturally conserving our differences, of our different sensitivities on many aspects. This is something connatural to the pro-nation parties. It's fundamental for every one of us, but cooperating on many issues about migration, about Green Deal policies, and many other things that has to be changed here.
Okay, now final question. I can't let you go before asking about Ukraine. Obviously, we haven't focused on the Ukraine war in the last few weeks because of all the news cycle, the crazy news cycle, but we're publishing more about Italy, thanks to our Italy correspondent who is in the room. And what I've been hearing is that unlike in some other countries, such as Germany, which is reintroducing conscription, that the Italians are not that happy with the idea that Europe could soon be at war with Russia. Is that true?
Yes, it's true. We have been supportive to Ukraine from the very first moment of the Russian aggression, but always keeping the position not to enter a war against Russia, but just supporting Ukraine in the defensive war, trying to stop the aggression. And we fully support the attempts by President Trump to put the two parties on the table. We saw what happened in the Emirates in yesterday and in the days before, and it's something that it's a hope for us in order to stop this war. We see what's happening at the front. There's no concrete gain of territories from the Russian part, and it's a sufferance from the Ukrainian part as well. So it's nonsense, and I think that we have to fully support these efforts from President Trump to stop this crazy war. And it's also something that is having a cost in terms of public opinion, even in Italy, because naturally people don't understand this war after almost 4 years, and they want to stop it. And we also paid not only with direct funding to support Ukraine, but also, for example, with the consequences of the sanctions. We had lots of businesses with Russia that we had to interrupt. We have the issue of the Russian gas, and we've been one of the first European countries to diversify very rapidly our supplies of gas and oil from Russia to other countries in order to stop our dependency. So we made a very strong efforts. So we want to stop the war and support Trump in doing this, but also support Ukraine in the negotiation table in order to have a decent end of this issue.
And what do you say to your colleagues who say that President Putin cannot be trusted, that if there's an agreement in Ukraine, he will come after the other half, and then the Baltic states and Poland? What do you say to them?
This is the reason why our Italian position from the very beginning, after Trump's election, was focused about the security guarantees. We think that this is the main point right now. We have to build an architecture that can prevent Russia to invade again not only Ukraine but also other European friend countries. This is the main issue, much more than sending their military with boots on the ground, something that is, for example, the position of the French government and other European allies. This is not our position from the very beginning. We are saying, okay, we need security guarantees. For this reason, we need the US to, with their military strength, to ensure the concrete application of these guarantees. That is something similar to Article 5 of the NATO treaty that we applied just in Afghanistan, coming back to what we mentioned before. But we need something similar, and the Russians have to know that if they will invade again Ukraine or the Baltic states and so on, the Western allies, they are ready to intervene. Then it's the deterrence that we need in order to stop any kind of negative will from Russia.
Okay, we're out of time. Thanks for coming in, Carlo.
See you.
Thanks for tuning in, Alex. And thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye. 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 Bye.